But thank you all so much for joining us for best-selling author Mark Greaney, who will discuss his new thriller, Midnight Black, a Gray Man novel, in this installment of Author Hour in Massachusetts. So Mark's research for the Gray Man novels has taken him to more than 35 countries, and he has trained alongside military and law enforcement in the use of firearms, battlefield medicine, and close-range combat tactics. With Marine Lieutenant Colonel Rip Rawlings, he wrote the New York Times bestseller Red Metal. Mark is also the author of the New York Times bestsellers Tom Clancy Support and Defend, Tom Clancy Full Force and Effect, Tom Clancy Commander in Chief, and Tom Clancy True Faith and Allegiance. And with Tom Clancy, he co-authored Locked On, Threat Vector, and Command Authority. And tonight, he's here to talk about his brand new book, Midnight Black, which is the, let's see, I should know this. Is it the 14th, Mark? I've lost track. The 14th book in the Gray Man series. So all of us who are watching live, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Mark for joining us here tonight. And Mark, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. This is fun. I'm happy to be here.
So Mark, we'll have a conversation for about 30 minutes or so, and then I'll turn it over to the audience. So the first thing I wanted to ask you, though, and I'm sure you've been talking about this you've been getting this question nonstop for a couple of weeks, but could you tell us a little bit about your new book, Midnight Black?
Yes. As you said, the 14th installment. If you haven't read any of the other Gray Man books or you didn't read the last one, no worries. It's a complete standalone novel, just like they all are. I kind of, if you do read them all, there's kind of a longer story arc, but each story can stand on its own. It's about my hero, a guy named Court Gentry, who's a former CIA paramilitary officer. And in this book, the woman he loves and has been with for the last, I'm trying to think, about 8 books off and on in different relationships, but he's in a very strong relationship with her now. At the end of the last book, she was taken into Russia. And everybody that Court sort of trusts in the West believes she's been executed, that she was killed in the Lefortovo prison. But he won't let himself believe that. And he's desperate to get into Russia and find her. Meanwhile, Zoya is her name. Zoya is in a women's correctional colony, just suffering under hard labor, trying to stay alive, but also trying to manipulate her captors. So it's a big, almost Cold War era, Cold War-esque espionage type novel with some John Wick action thrown in as well.
So taking a step back, what inspired you to write the Gray Man series, and how did you come up with the character of Court Gentry?
So what inspired me to write the series? That's a question I don't get a lot. And so I'm gonna have to think about it. And really the first thing that comes to mind, to be completely honest, is I was inspired by the fact that I'd written 3 manuscripts, none of which had gotten published. and that's kind of true. I was trying to figure out what I was gonna write for my 4th book. And I had an agent who was interested in my writing, but not the books that I'd given him. And he really wanted me to beef up the action. At one point he said, I want you to write a book where you could identify with one main character, literally put a guy on the cover of your book with a gun in his hand, and that, make the story, I don't want to say that simple because there's a lot of twists and turns, but I think what I had turned in before was a little more Tom Clancy-esque, which ultimately I got to, and ultimately the series, I guess, kind of is a little more similar to. But at the very beginning, when I was trying to get published, it was that. And I was down in El Salvador. I worked for a medical device company, and I had to speak Spanish a lot. And my Spanish is terrible. I just had lived in Miami for a while, and I had a Colombian girlfriend, and I'd studied some Spanish. So they just made me the Spanish speaker in my office in Memphis, Tennessee. And so I was down in Guatemala studying Spanish, went to El Salvador for the weekend, and I saw this guy in a bar who was American and just looked very interesting to me. And I just made up this backstory, not thinking that it was going to be my next book, but I just made up a backstory about this guy who was a former CIA officer living in the developing world because the CIA is trying to kill him. And I kind of built it up from there. And I think the next day or the day after that, I was like, well, maybe that guy could be in a book. And I, started with that. It's a long answer, but it was kind of a long process.
And you mentioned Tom Clancy in that answer, and I do want to kind of stay on track with the Gray Man series, but I do have to ask you, what was it like collaborating with Tom Clancy and ultimately taking over one of his series?
Well, at first it was terrifying. He didn't make it that way. I probably did that myself. I had only had two. When The Gray Man came out, it was a mass market original, so like a small paperback, airplane paperback. And I honestly don't think they make mass market originals anymore. If they do, it's pretty rare. And it was not a big deal. It sold to Hollywood pretty quick, but a lot of things sell to Hollywood and don't go anywhere. So I had only put two books out, but my publisher was also Tom Clancy's publisher, and he was looking for a co-author. So they came to me and asked if I was interested. My editor, Tom Colgan, knew that I was a big Clancy fan. So he knew, I guess, at least that I knew the characters and the genre. And and then they had me go up to Baltimore to meet Tom. Had a ton of social anxiety. I was really nervous, but that all went really well. And then we did that first book, Locked On. And at that time, I was not allowed to tell anybody I was working with Tom because I guess they wanted to see how the book turned out. So I was going up to the Pentagon to do research and meeting with people. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to tell anybody that I was writing the next Jack Ryan book with Tom Clancy. That would have opened any door I wanted open. Instead, I was the little paperback writer trying to get the info. But the book did well. And then I did a total of three with him before he passed away, and then the family asked me to continue and do the series. So I did 7 in 6 years, and it almost feels like a fever dream now. It's like I still can't kind of believe it happened.
And court gentry is your own, but I'm just curious. Can you compare and contrast a little bit of court gentry with Jack Ryan? What do you see as some of their similarities, and what do you see as some of their differences?
Yeah, when I was writing both series at the same time, every interviewer would always ask me, do you get them too confused when you're writing the books? And it was interesting because I would guess that an author would get them confused, and that never once happened because I just saw the worlds as being different. The characters are different enough, but the worlds in which they live are just completely different to me. So when I'm doing one book, I'm not thinking about the other. And the differences are, at the time, the Gray Man series was a little more. The first couple books I say are kind of close to Die Hard. It's a very sort of compressed timeline, and it's super action. There's still a fun, cool story, and I do put twists and turns and some intelligence tradecraft and stuff like that. So it's not all like swinging on vines with machine guns, but it's a ton of action. The Jack Ryan books are more geopolitical, more kind of 30,000 foot level looking down, and you definitely get down in the dirt with the hero here and there, but it's also like you're in the Oval Office. Like the Gray Man's never going to be standing in the Oval Office in any Gray Man book. Here we are 14 books later, and I can promise you that if he's in the Oval Office, it's going to be probably the end of me. That's just not how I see the series. So I've always seen them as very, very distinct, and they were both fun to write.
Do you have an end game yet for your Gray Man series? I was reading an Ask Me Anything type interview you did on Goodreads maybe five years ago or so, and at that point you did not have an endpoint in mind. Do you, 5 years later, do you kind of have a sense of how you're going to wrap up the series or not?
I don't actually. I have a couple of ideas which are completely mutually exclusive. So I guess that means I don't have an answer. There's a couple of things that would be like very interesting ways for it to turn at the end. If I know that it's the end, I might get hit by a bus right in the middle of writing a book, and that'll never happen. But there's a couple of mutually exclusive ideas. So nothing that I've locked in on. It's not like I'm going to do 20 books and then out, or 16 books and then out. When I wrote The Gray Man, I had no idea it was going to be a series, to the extent that when my editor asked me if I wanted to do 2 more books before the first one came out, he called me up and said, we'd like to offer you a 2-book deal to do 2 more books. And I was like, great. I was like, what do you want them to be about? And he kind of laughed, and he's like, I have no idea. You're the writer. That's your job. I was like, oh, okay. I knew so little about series. I hadn't even thought about it. So I don't have an end game specific in mind. I have a couple ideas, both which would be cool. So maybe I'll pick one of those, and maybe it'll be neither of those.
So, Mark, when I introduced you in your bio, it references that you've done training with the military and with law enforcement on firearms and battlefield medicine and close range combat tactics. So I'm wondering, how do you I want you to kind of expound on that. And, how do you do the research for your books, particularly the military and intelligence related aspects?
Yeah, so I have trained. That's all written by the publicist, and maybe there should be another word in there. I've trained with members of the military and law enforcement. So I've gone to these professional schools where I've been in the team room with guys from the Special Forces Group or SWAT guys from around the world, federal law enforcement agencies, and we've all worked on in different types of classes. Some of them are like week-long, team, small unit, combat things, and then there's lots of others that I've done. So I've also taken a lot of training from former military, Delta Force guys, Navy SEAL, that sort of stuff. Lots of law enforcement. I think pretty much everyone I've ever trained with has some kind of law enforcement background, if not just directly from the military. So I started doing that as I was writing my first manuscript, which was never published. And I just felt like I needed to know. My mom had a revolver. She was a farm girl from Wichita, Kansas. So I would go with her to the range when I was a kid. And she was kind of a crack shot, but I didn't know that much about firearms. I wanted to write about them. I loved reading those spy novels and stuff. So I was like, I need to get some training. And then one class turned to the next class, turned to the next class. And sooner or later, you're with police officers. And then you're with, high level federal police officers, and then you're with military guys and doing these different things. So it really does inform the writing, and more than anything else, meeting the men and the women who, in the team rooms, in the bunkhouses, and spending time with them, and then getting to know them and getting them as kind of contacts. It has been huge for me. And the larger scale military stuff. I mean, I've been to the Pentagon, and talked to people, and I spoke to a general in Germany. There's just different ways to skin a cat with that. I've gotten to spend time with the Navy out in San Diego and Air Force and at Nellis Air Force Base. So I've done different things of that nature. And, I try to learn as much as I can in the 6 months or 9 months that I have to write the book, and then just try and get it all out on the page.
Fascinating. So this question's a little dated because the film's been out for like 3 years now, but The Gray Man was made into a film. I think Netflix picked it up and produced it. Ryan Gosling and Chris Evans. I think Billy Bob Thornton was in it. A lot of like superstars were in it. What was your involvement with the film? Did you have any control over any of the casting decisions or anything really, the script or whatnot? And what did you think of the final product?
Yeah, I had no control over any of it whatsoever. Fortunately, the Russo brothers, right when they decided they were going to write the script and direct it, they had me go out to LA and spend a couple days with them, or maybe 3 days. And we talked about not just the Gray Man book, but also where the story goes in the series and all that kind of, like where I saw the story going beyond. And they took a bunch of notes, and then they went, and Joe Russo wrote the first draft of the script and sent it to me. And, we talked, and a few years went in between. All this time, it seemed like it would get close and then kind of fall away and get close. The Russo brothers were making all the Marvel films, so that obviously took a lot of attention. And but they would always say, Joe would call me and go like, "This is the one that we really don't want to let get away." And it's been nagging at us. We really want to make this film. And so yeah, it finally came out in 22, and I liked it. I mean, it's cynical to say it, but it's true. It's a huge commercial for my books. It's probably 60% like my book and 40% completely different from anything that I wrote. And that works for me. I mean, I'm happy with that. I had no casting control or any control like that. And, unless you're Stephen King or J.K. Rowling, that's pretty hard to get. And, when I first sold the film rights, the book hadn't even come out. And I wasn't trying to get anything more than a book deal so I could a film deal so I could tell people that Hollywood had picked it up. I never actually thought it would get made.
So sort of a big picture question, Mark. In your own words, what makes a good thriller? What are the elements that a good thriller must contain?
I always, when I get stuck, I always, when I get stuck at the beginning, trying to come up with what my story is about, I always ask myself, what does the villain want? What does your antagonist want? And I swear, I can't really explain why, but the better you know that, the easier it is to put the other pieces in there. And I guess it's just as simple as like that's your premise. If you know who your hero is, I mean, this is a series, but even if it's not a series, you should know who your protagonist is. But the story in a thriller often is driven by the antagonist's wishes, not the protagonist's desire to climb a mountain or something like that. That's not a thriller. That's a cool story, but that's not a thriller. There has to be an antagonist of some sort, and I guess the antagonist could be the weather in the scenario I just said. But you have to know intimately what it is that they want, and then you just start. I really like character building, understanding all the characters very well, even the smaller characters. Like, why is this guy a henchman for this guy? You don't always get to do that, but the more you can do that, the more you can fill in the pieces with some, setting and things like that. Location is always super important for me. I like building that. It's like when I've taught some little day long writing classes, and I always stress to people that the one thing you learn is that everything is super important, and everybody's like, what's the important thing? And it's just kind of like, the length of your paragraphs is important. The repetition of words or the lack of repetition of words is important. So it's just this thing that you write that first draft as fast as you can and try and just keep the energy up and keep the energy up. And then you go back and make everything a little bit more precise. So I don't really have a secret sauce to it, but I always think the better I understand my villain, the better the story is going to be.
You mentioned that you've given day-long writing classes before. I'm curious if you have any general advice for aspiring writers who want to break into the thriller genre.
Well, yeah, a few things. I mean, the first and foremost thing is when people come to me trying to get inspiration or whatever, I always tell them, that's got to come from within. And I wrote for 20 years before I got published, and I don't mean to scare anybody off with that, because I was really only probably working hard for, a year and a half out of that 20 years. It was just sort of like an aspiration of mine. So I'd pick it up and write for a while. It took me 15 years to write my first book, and it shouldn't have. It took me 7 months to write my second, and it took me 6 months to write The Gray Man. And I had a full-time job, and I still did it in that amount of time. So I just think you have to ask yourself, if you're really struggling with sitting down and doing it, if you like to do it. And if you let yourself, if you acknowledge, hey, it's actually fun to think of this stuff and to get it down on paper, and it can be really frustrating on the day to edit it and figure out if this is the right word, but still it brings you joy, then you're going to be fine. Just lean into that joy and don't worry about anything else, and then write. I mean, the next thing I would say is finish something. Don't have 4 books going, because of so many people that I talk to, they're like, oh yeah, I'm working on this, and I'm working on a short story, and I'm working on this, and that's proof that I'm a writer. And it's like, if you're writing, you're a writer. But if it always indicates to me when somebody tells me they're working on 6 projects, as a way to sort of say, look how legit I am. I'm thinking, you've gotten to the hard part in each one of those projects, and you've stopped and went and picked something else up. So even if you write a short story, you need to be able to write a beginning, a middle, an end. You need to be able to edit it and understand the pacing and just sort of understand everything. And so, I always tell people to don't be afraid of it, but don't be overconfident if you haven't completed anything. Really focus on one thing and get to those roadblocks and just fight your way through them. Don't put the thing down and go start something else, because that's not progress. That's just sort of like shifting, and writing the easy parts on different books, if that makes sense.
Sure. And so actually it segues into my next question. And you've touched on this a bit already with that answer, but could you talk a little bit about your own writing process? Do you plan out the entire book, or do you let the story kind of evolve as you go?
So my entire career, and before I was published, I have always tried with every single book to plan the whole thing out as best I can at the beginning, and I just fail at that. And I know that there's authors that can do it. And really, one book I did, the book that I co-authored with Rip Rawlings called Red Metal. Since we were both writing different parts of the book, wasn't a collaboration. It was sort of a very specific collaboration. Like, you're going to write this character all the way through. I'm going to write this character all the way through. We kind of had to have a really good blueprint. So we probably spent a year coming up with a 91 chapter outline, and then we'd go off and write our different pieces. And still it diverged. Like, when it all came back together at the end, we'd both gone off astray a little bit, and then you just have to edit it back together. But you know, I am a pantser, unfortunately, which is what they call somebody that makes it up on the day. I don't want to be. I spent November and December of last year trying to plot out the book that I'm writing this year, which is the 15th Gray Man novel. And looking back, I mostly just wasted that time because once I got in and started writing, I was able to find my way along because I don't know, I kind of have to be in the thick of it to really see the next part. And it's not a perfect thing. I would love to know what's going to happen later in the story. So I guess I'm saying I'm a pantser, but I'm not somebody that's trying to sell other people on that. It feels like more like a curse than a blessing, but that's what I am at this point.
So, by the way, you mentioned Red Metal just there, with which you co-authored, or I'm not sure what the right word is, but I guess co-authored.
Yeah,
with,
that's right. Yeah.
Ripley Rawlings, Lieutenant Colonel. Conflicting information on the internet, Mark. Is there going to be a sequel to that book?
Yes, there is eventually. It should have come out years and years ago. What happened was when Russia did the full-scale invasion of Ukraine 3 years ago, yesterday, or three years ago this week, Rip got very involved in supporting the Ukrainians with a nonprofit and went over there. And so we all just sort of said, okay, let's just put this on hiatus because this is obviously more important. And he's now working on the book, and then I'll do a draft of the book when he's done. I have something else that I'm writing right now, and something else coming out right after that, but it may be the book after that. It's one of those things. In a perfect world, it would have come out years ago, and it was nobody's fault. I mean, other than Vladimir Putin's. But it's something that is on the horizon, not immediate horizon, but somewhere out there. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I didn't realize that was the answer to that question, and I was going to ask you later on. Do real life geopolitical events ever influence your writing? I mean, obviously, this book is based in Russia. So I guess the answer to that is yes. Yes, it does.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So I did. So, oh, by the way, folks, so we are at the 30-minute mark, by the way, folks. So if you have any questions for Mark, feel free to start getting them into the Q&A box. And we do have a couple already, but I'm going to continue on with my questions for now. But please, folks, feel free to continue to get yours into the Q&A. This is kind of a fun one from Mark. If Court Gentry was real, do you think you'd get along with him, or would you find him too intense?
I would find him too intense. We don't have the same personality. And I mean, honestly, to look at that a little deeper, I think he would have a hard time, making friends and trusting. The interesting thing about Midnight Black is he's in love with this woman, and I kind of see it as, of all the skills that he's developed in his life and his career, this ability to trust another person has been the last thing that he's developed, and it just happened a couple of books ago, and he was kind of secure in that, and then this has all happened. So I see him as somebody that would be hard to trust, hard to get to know, affable if he needed to be. I mean, he's a quirky guy, but he understands social engineering because he's trained as a spy, and spies are able to, socially engineer people. So maybe I would think we were buddies, but I don't think he would really confide in me. But he and I have the same kind of moral code, and in every other way, he's better than me. I'm always like, that character can climb a high fence, jump down on the other side, and then run off. It's like I might be able to climb a high fence and fall down the other side and never get back up. That's about as close as I can be to him.
And I ain't climbing that fence, Mark.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
circling back to Midnight Black, you had mentioned at the very beginning that even if you haven't read any or all of the books in the series, you can pick it up and read it kind of as a standalone. But for the many fans of yours that have read the series, and without going into spoilers, but you had mentioned that there's some familiar characters. So aside from Court, and again, you can give away as much or as little as you'd like. And by the way, I do appreciate at the beginning of the book, you have a list of the characters. So helpful. Every author
yeah,
should do that. But
yeah.
do you want to talk about some of the authors that some of your fans might be familiar with that they'll see pop up in the book?
Yeah, sure. And two things. First, that character list. It's funny. Yes, it's for the readers eventually, but I'm writing it as I'm writing the book, and it's for me because a lot of the secondary characters they make appear in earlier chapters and then later, and you have to go back. So I'll kind of keep that running list, and it ends up getting published. I clean it up and it's published. And then secondly, as far as spoilers, I know what's on the book flap, so I can don't, I know what I can talk about. And then, just give little teases. But this book also has a character named Zach Hightower who was, he's been in a lot of the Gray Man books, not all of them. He used to be an adversary of Court's, and now they're friends. And at the beginning of this book, Zach is under house arrest. The CIA has him under house arrest for something that had happened previously. But very quickly, the CIA comes to him and says, tell you what, we'll let you out if you go do this thing that we need you to do, which involves Russian military intelligence and the sabotage operations they're doing all over Europe. So Zach has to go get himself involved with a team to try and clean some of that up. So that's where we find him at the beginning of the book. And then, of course, Zoya, who is, his love interest, and she's a character that's not, just a prop. She's not just sitting in a jail waiting to be rescued. There's a lot more going on in the story than that, and it's fun to bring her back and to reintroduce her. Some of the other main characters, a guy named Matt Hanley, who is kind of Court's puppet master in some ways, in good ways and in bad ways, depending on the book. But he's a former deputy director of operations for the CIA, and now he is working in a smaller role, but he's trying to help Court on his mission to get into Russia and find this woman.
So I will start to transition to audience questions, and I'll continue to sprinkle in my own. I did want to give a shout out. Someone is watching from Ontario, Canada, so we are international. So thank you. I don't see anyone from Tennessee, but I'll keep an eye out for that there. All right. So Kristen says, wondering about the role of women in your books. Do any play antagonist or protagonist roles? Are there any sort of female versions of Gentry?
Okay, yeah. There's a lot that have been protagonists and a lot that have been antagonists. Maybe more antagonists than protagonists. As far as antagonists, a woman named Suzanne Brewer entered the series. Actually, she was in the movie in a slightly different role. Actually, not too different from how I used her. The interesting thing about the movie was they were planning on they are planning on turning that into a series of films from the beginning. And the Gray Man novel, I wasn't thinking of that from the beginning. So they put characters in that first film that don't show up till book 2 or book 5. Brewer came along in book 5 called Backblast. And she is, if you think of her as Court's handler, but she's secretly trying to kill him. And he's not sure about if that's happening. And most of his friends are pretty sure that it is happening. So that's her. Protagonist-wise, also antagonist, the First Lady of Syria was a protagonist in a book called Agent in Place. And I, tried to make her much like Asma Assad, the First Lady of Syria, as possible, with some narrative license as well. There have been others. And, as far as protagonists, there's Zoya Zakharova, who is a former Russian SVR, which is their foreign intelligence officer. And she is kind of, I won't say she's the female Court Gentry, but when I first got the idea of her, I thought, what if there was a female character who could be, they maybe start out as adversaries, but they have a lot of the same qualities and same vulnerabilities, or kind of mirroring vulnerabilities. And that's how I wrote Zoya. And I think my original plan was for her to be in 1 or 2 books. but I think she hasn't been in every book in the second half of the series, but she's been in a lot, and she's definitely been in the last three. And so she's a fun character to write and to build. She's had her ups and downs. She's definitely, this book finds her in a women's correctional colony called YK2 Yavis in Mordovia in the center of Russia during winter, making military uniforms 16 hours a day. And at the same time, the FSB, which is Russian internal security, is using her to try to lure the gray man into a trap, which is not spoiling anything. This is just, general ideas of the book that are all on the jacket. But Zoya is a fun character. A woman named Angela Lacey has come around the last few books. She seems to be on Court's side, and I'm not saying that to be cagey, but it's funny. From one book to the next, different things can happen. I like kind of those gray areas where Court's friends sometimes have a mission that's bigger than him. But Angela has been a good character to add in the last few books.
So in the chat, Grant mentions, we talked about your work with Tom Clancy and in the Jack Ryan universe. We talked about, obviously, The Gray Man. And Grant also mentions your other series, the Armored series. And could you tell us a little bit about that? And I believe we're going to see future books in that series as well.
Yeah, so nothing is set as far as future books. I really want to do them. I used to be a 2-book-a-year guy. I think I'm a 1-book-a-year guy now. And so it might be a little while, but I would like to write more Josh Duffy books. It's actually the first one, Armored, has sold to TV, so they're developing it for TV. We'll see what happens. But it's the story of a guy named Josh Duffy, who is a former military guy, but lost his leg as a security contractor in Lebanon. And in the first book, Armored, he gets pulled into this basic suicide mission into Mexico, like a security mission into Mexico, where all is not as it seems, and it's just a crazy action adventure. And the second book was called Sentinel, and it's 4 years later in the second book, and he and his wife are working for the State Department, and they're in Africa, in Ghana, and they find themselves with their family in the middle of a coup that goes on there. So it's a fun character to write. I got to go to Ghana and spend days with the diplomatic security service at the embassy there in Accra, and I definitely want to do more in that series because he's a great character. I guarantee that if the TV series gets greenlit, they'll come back to me and want some books really quick. But hopefully, either way, I'll do more.
Mark, do you ever have former or active CIA agents and other operatives or whatever the terminology is come up to you or contact you somehow and tell you that they're fans of the Gray Man? I'm sure you love all your fans, but I bet you really get a kick out of that.
Yeah. I get all these guys from Secret Service to CIA to different military units and all the 3-letter agencies. It's really cool. I mean, it's funny in so many ways. They are more accepting of me than the average Joe Blow who will write me and say that, oh, that could never happen. And obviously it's fiction, and obviously the whole idea of the Gray Man series is I try to make it seem so realistic in so many places, because at certain places it's going to be just outlandish as far as something that can happen. And it's been like that from the beginning. It's always been my intention. But there'll be guys from Ground Branch, which is the actual unit in the CIA that Court used to work in, that really like really enjoy the books, and they're having fun with it. They're not gonna come up to me and go I never killed 17 bad guys and swam with a crocodile or whatever I have Court do. It's like they're not looking at it for that. They're looking at it for entertainment, and I think they do enjoy it.
So Larry asks, so when you're in your writing process, can you turn off thinking about your characters, or is it all consuming for you?
It's funny. I guess I'm disciplined, but it's sometimes it's not the healthiest discipline. Sometimes at night I want to go to sleep and I just go you've got to figure this out. You've got to figure this plot hole out. You have to lay here and work on this and work on this. So it is kind of all consuming, but it's not like an obsessed thing where I can't eat at the dinner table without thinking about stuff. It's more like I make myself do it as far as work. My wife has seen it a million times. My eyes will go distant for a little bit while we're doing something, and take a note or write something down, because things do pop in at the strangest times. But a lot of it is me telling myself, all right, I'm on this flight. Sit here, shut your eyes, figure something out, write it down, and then do it again. So it's kind of all consuming, but not in a super unhealthy way.
So Mark, what are some of your hobbies besides writing? And in terms of reading, who do you like to read?
Hobbies wise, I really like shooting, so I own a lot of the firearms that the characters use. It started out as just research for the books, but there's a range 20 minutes from my house, and I love going there. I like to scuba dive. I've done it a lot. I live in Memphis, Tennessee, which is not really the scuba diving mecca you can imagine, but I like to go to the Bahamas or Hawaii or Mexico, and different places. I've dived in Croatia and some cool places. So I love to do that. I like to, my wife and I watch a movie or a TV show virtually every night. So I'm really into anything. I'll consume anything as far as like entertainment. And books I like to read. I read so much for research that there's not, I don't read the new book as it comes out all the time, unfortunately. There's a few guys in my genre that I really like. I like Brad Taylor and Brad Thor and there's so many. There's like Greg Hurwitz is a good one, and David McCloskey, and there's just a bunch of new guys. Josh Hood, and I like to read them when I can. A lot of times I'm reading for blurbs, to write something on the cover of the book, say how much I liked it. But it's pretty rare that I pick up a book just to read for pleasure. Right now, my new book involves the Irish Republican Army, going back a few years. So I'm reading some literature about that right now, and that's where my brain needs to be.
And is that the book number 15 in the Gray Man series that you referenced?
Yeah, that'll be book number 15. It doesn't really involve the IRA in present day, but it'll involve some things that happened in the past. So I'm going to go to Northern Ireland in April and do some location research. I love to travel. My wife does too, so that's another hobby.
Nice. And maybe there's scuba diving in Ireland. Plenty of cliffs and water, I'd imagine.
Yeah.
So an anonymous attendee asks, special ops teams are a tight-knit group. How did you get invited into their inner circle?
Well, to the extent that I'm in an inner circle, I know a bunch of people who are Delta and a bunch of people who are SEALs, and I know some Team 6 guys. So, you can be a SEAL and not kind of the black side, but if you're Delta, you're black side. And it's the individuals. These guys are retired. Like I've never been to like Coronado for the SEALs or Dam Neck or anything like that. But I know people that have done that for a living, and I definitely have trained with active duty people in different. I've never trained with an active duty Delta guy, but former for sure. And so just one person knows one person, and I joined a group called AFIO, which is the Association of Former Intelligence Officers. Like at the beginning of my career, you don't have to be a former intelligence officer to be a member of the group, and there were different symposiums and meetings and stuff, and I would go to those and meet people, and that was a cool way to be let in. I'm sure they're a close knit group when they're operational, but the individuals aren't any different from you and I.
Yeah. In addition to that character list, I also appreciated the acronym list. So yes, you just referenced a couple of acronyms there. So Grant has a question. Mark has the Tom Clancy line. I think you've wrapped up with Tom Clancy. Is that correct? That you're out of the Tom Clancy universe now?
I am now. Yes.
So he says, though, your Tom Clancy stuff was fantastic. Your Gray Man stuff blows most series I've read out of the water. So Grant says you're clearly very busy at the moment, but all good things must come to the end. And so his question is, do you have another character or another series that you're thinking about introducing in the future?
I am going to do a standalone novel that is a thriller, but it's not espionage or military related. And I'm going to do that next year. So I'm going to write it in 26 and it'll be out in 27. And I don't want to go into too much because I really don't have too much, but I have sort of a framework for it. So I don't see it as a series. I see it as a one-off book and a slightly different, not a different genre, but different from my stuff, if that makes sense. And I'm going to do that. And other than that, I mean, there were like ideas that I had for a long, long time. There's completed manuscripts that I've done where I can never publish it because I've taken out a lot of the cool stuff and used it in other books because it wasn't publishable. But like there's characters in there. There's like protagonists in there that I'd like to jump back to. So I do have other things that I would like to do down the road for sure.
So folks, we're going to start to wind down the interview. If you have any questions or comments for Mark, now's the time to get them into the chat, to get them into the Q&A. And so I'm not sure I actually asked you this at the beginning, Mark. I usually ask about the author's origin story. I think I asked you what inspired you to write the Gray Man series, but how did you get involved in writing in the first place?
Yeah, I don't think I have the most interesting origin story, but I never read any fiction, but I read a lot of nonfiction as a kid. My dad was in the Second World War, and he was the head of the TV station, the NBC TV station here in Memphis. So he was very intimately interested in the news, and I just grew up around that. And it's at the South. I love going to Civil War battlefields and things like that, and I love to read about that. So I grew up reading a ton of nonfiction, and the first fiction novel I ever bought in my entire life was Patriot Games by Tom Clancy. And I realized, wow, you can have a lot of fun, reading the story, but also learn a lot too. And I didn't even know that was possible. So that I immediately read his other two books. At the time, he only had two other books. And then I'd read anybody else in that genre, and I just fell in love with the genre. So I was studying international relations in college, and I got an idea for a story, and this was in 1990, and I started writing, so I was 22, and I finished it in 2005. So as I said earlier, like I would pick it up and I'd put it down, but I would think about this story all the time. I could see every part, and I could see the sequel and what would happen in that, and it was just very, very visceral all through my 20s and into my 30s, and I finally finished that story in 2005. And I never sent that to anybody. It never really got rejected or anything because I never sent it to anybody. But I immediately started writing something else, and I finished that in 7 months, got that in front of an agent. He said no, but he said, "You're a really good writer. This is very action-packed, but it's not really a story that I think we can really sell." So I went and wrote something else for him and wrote something else. And it was the fourth time was the charm with me. And that guy is still my agent today. Every single book he's been my agent on. My editor has been my editor for 24 out of the 26 books that I published. So I've stayed with the same capable crew.
Lots of positive comments coming in through the chat. John says The Gray Man is my favorite series. Denise, awesome. Thanks you for the great interview and discussion. She loved your latest book. So Mark, as we start awesome. To wind down, you've already told us what you're working on next. Can you tell us where can folks follow you online? Where can they learn more about you and your works?
Sure. I have a website. It's my name, Mark Greaney, Greaney, books.com. And I'm on all the usual suspect social media accounts, Facebook and Instagram and X. And you can find me there. And I hope people will look around for me.
No, Mark, I don't do a lot of these interviews. I'm usually the behind the scenes person. Was there anything I should have asked that you wish I asked? Anything else you want to share with the audience before we wrap things up?
No, I don't think so. I feel like we're pretty well covered.
All right, great. Well, folks, please go out. Look at this. I even got the book. What a pro I am. Please go out and purchase a copy of Mark's latest, Midnight Black. You'll receive an email from me tomorrow with a link to Wellesley Books, certainly one of the best independent bookstores in Massachusetts, but feel free to purchase the book however you'd like. And in addition, look for the recording in that email and information about some other upcoming virtual programs. And don't forget to fill out the feedback survey. So thank you all so much for joining us. Mark, wonderful job. This is like a highlight of my career. I can't believe I did this. So thank you so much for carrying me through this interview. And I really wish you the best of luck with the rest of your book tour and the 15th book in the series you're working on right now.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. This has been fun.
All right. Have a great night, everyone.
You too.
Bye.